her cruel decree. Stop acting married, you get no say. I took her at her word. Returning from her weekend, her key failed. My home was transformed. A bachelor's sanctuary with a giant, loyal dog. The neighbor revealed everything. She learned the true cost of her dismissive words. A perfect, quiet revenge. The incandescent fury of my girlfriend Jessica had always been a celestial constant in our relationship, a sun around which I, a small, insignificant planet, orbited in a perpetual gravitational pull. I, however, held a more grounded, if less poetic, belief that cohabitation, shared meals, and continuous Wi-Fi consumption implied a partnership, a mutual agreement, a shared reality. For 2 turbulent years, we had navigated this cosmic discrepancy, with the last 6 months marking her tenancy in my house. My name, not hers, was etched onto the mortgage papers, emblazoned on every utility bill, and even appeared on the quaint little plaque by the door that optimistically declared the Wilsons, a decorative flourish she'd acquired without a single consultation. I considered myself an easygoing man, content in my quiet life as a graphic designer working from home. My social calendar typically revolved around a couple of trusted friends and the thrill of trying a new frozen pizza on a Friday night. Jessica's existence, in stark contrast, was a meticulously crafted theatrical production, and her devoted audience of 3 best friends, a cackling Greek chorus I privately christened the Harpies, was ever present. Tiffany, Brittany, and let's just call the third one Chardonnay, were the ever-revolving cast of her drama. The curtain rose on the defining act of our story last weekend. I was absorbed in the comforting ritual of making dinner, the aroma of simmering pasta sauce filling the kitchen, when Jessica swept in. Her phone was pressed to her ear, her body already adorned for a grand entrance into the night. Her voice, amplified by the harpies on the other end, cut through the domestic tranquility. "Oh my God, yes. I am so in." She practically shrieked into the phone. "A weekend away is exactly what I need." Then, a dismissive wave of her hand, and a sharp, almost hostile laugh. "No, he's not coming. Don't be ridiculous." She ended the call, her face radiating an unbridled, almost cruel joy. "Good news, Tom. The girls and I are going to the lake for the weekend, leaving tomorrow." This was the inaugural announcement of this significant plan, delivered with the casual disregard one might offer a potted plant. "Oh, okay," I managed, my hand still stirring the pasta sauce, a faint sizzle echoing the sudden chill in the air. "Sounds fun. Which lake are you all heading to?" It was a simple question, a common courtesy exchanged between partners in any functioning relationship, a purely logistical inquiry. Jessica, however, regarded me with a look of profound, almost theatrical, disdain, as if I had just demanded a detailed explanation of quantum physics in ancient Sumerian. A short, sharp laugh escaped her lips before she swiveled to face Tiffany, who had materialized in the doorway, a silent, predatory presence. "Can you believe him?" Jessica hissed, rolling her eyes with exaggerated exasperation. "He wants to know where I'm going." Tiffany, the most venomous of the trio, scoffed, her gaze raking over me as if I were a piece of furniture she was contemplating for the curb. Then, Jessica turned back, hands planted firmly on her hips, her voice dripping with condescension as she delivered the decree that would forever echo in the hallowed halls of my future. "Stop acting like we're married. You don't get a say in where I go or who I'm with." The harpies, now fully assembled, erupted in a chorus of delighted cackles, a symphony of derision that filled my kitchen. They genuinely believed this was the pinnacle of comedic brilliance. A man in his own home, in his own kitchen, being unequivocally told he had no right to ask a simple question about his live and girlfriend's plans. It was, to them, hilariously absurd. I stood there, wooden spoon in hand, a single drop of pasta sauce falling to the pristine floor, a silent, scarlet tear. Yet, I felt no anger, no urge to argue. Instead, a strange, almost ethereal calm washed over me. It was the moment a crucial part of my mind, the part that had desperately clung to the illusion of this relationship's viability, quietly packed its tiny bags, donned a minuscule hat, and gracefully exited the building. I looked at her smug, smiling face, and I just smiled back. A big, friendly, completely empty smile. "You know what?" I said, my voice filled with a deceptive cheerfulness that belied the storm brewing beneath. "You are 100% correct. My mistake." They all laughed again, convinced I was simply backing down, the easily pliable fool they had always assumed me to be. Jessica, her victory secured, gave my cheek a patronizing little pat, and then, a triumphant phalanx, they swept out of the house, off to some pre-weekend cocktail hour I was, of course, not invited to. I remained in the kitchen, the lingering silence punctuated only by the soft bubbling of the pasta sauce, a culinary heartbeat in a suddenly empty home. "Okay," I whispered to myself, the word a quiet incantation, a new, much more interesting plan. meticulously designed and utterly ruthless, was already beginning to form in the quiet recesses of my mind. Not married. No say. Understood. The weekend, it seemed, was indeed going to be fun after all. Just not for her. Update 1. The moment Jessica's car, presumably brimming with 5 different types of glitter and a case of rose, vanished down the street that Friday afternoon, I sprang into action. My initial move wasn't to pack a bag or embark on a frenzied cleaning spree. It was a mission of paramount strategic importance, a diplomatic visit next door to Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable, an 80-year-old widow, was a neighborhood institution. With her sweet smile, her prize-winning rose garden, and a surveillance network that would humble even the most advanced intelligence agency, absolutely nothing transpired on our street without her encyclopedic knowledge. I arrived bearing a generous slice of the lemon cake she so adored, and we settled onto her quaint porch swing. After a cordial discussion about the surprisingly volatile weather patterns and the incessant moral failings of the local squirrels, I gently broached the true purpose of my visit. Mrs. Gable, I began, my voice carefully neutral. I find myself in a bit of a situation, and I believe I require your unique talents for a small theatrical production. Her eyes, usually twinkling with benign amusement, now lit up with a fervent anticipation of a seasoned theater critic. This woman, I knew, loved drama infinitely more than she cherished her prized roses. I recounted the events of the previous evening with meticulous detail, omitting no painful truth. Jessica's exact words, delivered with such venom and dismissiveness in front of her cackling entourage, resonated through the quiet afternoon. "Stop acting like we're married," I repeated, the phrase still a raw wound. "You don't get a say in where I go or who I'm with." I didn't need to embellish. The unvarnished truth was damning enough. By the time I concluded my narrative, Mrs. Gable was patting my hand with a look of righteous fury etched across her sweet, wrinkled face. "That shameless little hussy," she declared, her voice a surprisingly formidable rumble. "Don't you worry, Tom. You leave it to me. Now, what's my line?" I presented her with a simple, yet potent, script. When Jessica inevitably returned, expecting entry, and found herself locked out, Mrs. Gable was to appear confused and deliver a few carefully selected pieces of information. Mrs. Gable, in her full glory, embraced the task with the boundless enthusiasm of a seasoned Broadway actress preparing for opening night, her internal monologue already rehearsing the subtle nuances of her performance. With my indispensable accomplice secured, I returned home, eager to commence what I had internally dubbed Operation Bachelor Pad Resurrection. For the past 6 months, my house had slowly, insidiously, transformed into a beige-infused purgatory. It was a landscape of utterly pointless little bowls that perpetually held nothing, and art that looked disturbingly like a printer had run out of ink halfway through its miserable job. It was time, I decided, to reclaim my territory, to exorcise the spirit of sterile domesticity Jessica had imposed. My task was not merely to pack Jessica's belongings. It was an act of meticulous curation, a strategic categorizing of her entire physical existence. I procured a stack of sturdy boxes and a thick, unforgiving black marker. The first box was labeled, with a wry internal smile, "Everyday Clothes." The second, "Fancy clothes for fancy outings I wasn't invited to." The third, and my personal favorite, was designated for the magic sparkly dresses that shed glitter on everything I own. Her staggering collection of 37 pairs of indistinguishable high heels, a true monument to a podiatrist's impending nightmare, were carefully placed into a box of their own. Her mountain of makeup and skincare products, a veritable chemical arsenal, was packed into boxes labeled simply face paint and various scoops. By Saturday morning, every single trace of her physical occupation had been meticulously boxed and sealed. I then enlisted the help of a couple of strong, silent types from a moving app, and together, we loaded every last box into a 10x 5-foot storage unit. I paid for 1 month up front, a generous, decidedly non-marital gesture, I thought, offering her a fleeting, if ironic, grace period. The air in the now empty house felt lighter, cleaner, as if a long-held breath had finally been exhaled. The stage was cleared. With the house meticulously cleared of every last vestige of her belongings, the real, unapologetic fun commenced. I embarked on an epic shopping spree, a joyous reclamation of my personal aesthetic. The sterile beige rug, a symbol of Jessica's dull imposition, was ceremoniously rolled up and replaced with an AstroTurf rug that unapologetically resembled a vibrant football field. Her severely minimalist, sterile white couch, which had always felt more like a dentist's waiting room fixture than actual furniture, was quickly sold online. In its place, I acquired a colossal black leather recliner sofa, a magnificent beast boasting approximately 16 cup holders, a testament to pure, unadulterated comfort and utility. Her sad, art house coffee table, designed more for aesthetic contemplation than practical use, was swiftly swapped out for a vintage pinball machine I serendipitously discovered on Craigslist. It didn't actually work in the traditional sense, but its colorful lights still pulsed with a vibrant, retro energy. And that, I decided, was all that truly mattered. The bedroom was next, a final frontier in my domestic liberation. The peculiar macrame monstrosity she had painstakingly hung over the bed, a web of beige threads and misplaced aspirations, was summarily removed. In its stead, I proudly hung a framed poster depicting a majestic grizzly bear mid-leap, a salmon clutched firmly in its powerful jaws. It felt right, a declaration of untamed strength and natural order against the backdrop of manufactured gentility. My final, and arguably most brilliant, strategic move unfolded on Saturday afternoon. I drove to the local animal shelter, intending only to look. An hour later, I was driving home, not alone, but with a magnificent 120-pound St. Bernard puppy. His name was Gus. Gus was not a small dog. He was a furry, drooling, lovable wrecking ball of pure, unbridled joy. He immediately surveyed his new domain, claimed the gargantuan leather sofa as his rightful throne, and within minutes, fell into a deep, resonant sleep, snoring with the conviction of a seasoned lumberjack. The house was utterly transformed. It was no longer a lifeless showroom for a sad, beige existence. It was a formidable fortress of glorious, unapologetic bachelorhood, a vibrant canvas painted with my own preferences and passions. I spent the remainder of that weekend in a state of pure, unadulterated bliss. I played an endless game of fetch with Gus, threw back beers straight from the bottle in my own gloriously reconfigured living room, and perhaps most crucially, changed every single password related to my digital life. The new Wi-Fi network, a subtle nod to the foundational dispute of our former relationship, was christened Get Your Own Wi-Fi, and its password, a masterstroke of understated irony, was Not Married. Lol. On Sunday evening, as the last vestiges of daylight faded, I settled onto my 16-cup holder sofa, Gus's massive, drooling head resting contentedly in my lap. We waited. The storm, I knew, was imminent, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt completely, utterly prepared, my zen-like calm now infused with a quiet, steel-edged resolve. Update 2. Sunday night, precisely at 9 p.m., my video doorbell sent a notification to my phone. There she was. Jessica, looking fashionably tanned from her weekend at the lake, strolled up to my front door, a light, carefree hum escaping her lips. The meticulously choreographed comedy of errors began almost immediately. She inserted her key. It slid into the lock with familiar ease, but refused to turn. The new deadbolt, a silent guardian I had installed that very morning, was performing its duty with admirable efficiency. She jiggled the key, a faint look of mild annoyance flickering across her face. She tried again, with a slightly more aggressive twist. Then, an exasperated sigh, followed by a series of increasingly frantic bangs on the door. From the depths of the black leather sofa, Gus, my furry wrecking ball, merely lifted his massive head, let out a deep, rumbling woof that vibrated through the floorboards, and then, with a profound sigh of his own, promptly resumed his lumberjack-level snoring. Jessica began to call my phone, a rapid-fire assault of incoming vibrations that resonated on the gleaming surface of the vintage pinball machine. With a calm, almost leisurely sip of my beer, I hit decline. She called again, and again I declined. This infuriating, one-sided cycle repeated 5 more times, each attempt escalating the banging on the door, which grew louder, more frantic. "Tom, open the door. What is wrong with you? My key isn't working," she shrieked, her voice laced with an entitled fury. I remained utterly silent, a phantom presence in my own home. This, after all, was merely the overture to the grand performance I had meticulously orchestrated. After another 5 minutes of increasingly desperate pounding and indignant shouts, she seemed to concede defeat. The doorbell camera, ever vigilant, captured her pacing agitatedly on the porch, running her manicured hands through her impeccably styled hair. Then, precisely on cue, a warm, inviting porch light flickered on next door. It was Mrs. Gable, resplendent in her housecoat, a watering can held innocently in her grasp, ready for her starring role. "Showtime," I murmured to myself, a triumphant smile touching my lips. "Oh, Jessica, dear, is that you?" Mrs. Gable called out, her voice a flawless blend of genuine surprise and perfectly calibrated neighborly concern. "Mrs. Gable, thank God," Jessica exclaimed, practically sprinting to the edge of my porch, her desperation a palpable scent in the night air. "I can't get in. My key isn't working. Is Tom home? I can see the lights on." "Oh, Tom's home, all right," Mrs. Gable replied, nodding sagely, her eyes twinkling with a delicious mischief that only I could truly appreciate. "He's had the most wonderful weekend. A real transformation, you see." "Transformation?" Jessica echoed, her voice laced with suspicion, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. What in the world are you talking about? Mrs. Gable leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that was perfectly audible across the quiet porch. Well, he told me the good news, dear, she began, her eyes gleaming with suppressed glee. He said, you two aren't married. He said he doesn't get a say in anything you do, so he decided to celebrate his newfound freedom. He redecorated the whole house. It's a man's home now, he said, very rugged. Jessica just stood there, her mouth hanging agape, a slow, dawning horror spreading across her features. The implications of Mrs. Gable's words, echoing her own dismissive declaration from days prior, began to settle like a suffocating shroud. And the best part, Mrs. Gable continued, barely containing her mirth, a mischievous glint in her eyes. He got a dog, a great big, beautiful boy named Gus. He said he wanted a companion who was loyal and didn't talk back. Isn't that just sweet? The look on Jessica's face was a masterpiece of disbelief, horror, and incandescent rage, all swirling together in a grotesque tableau. She slowly turned, her head moving with the jerky stiffness of a broken automaton, and peered through my living room window. From my comfortable vantage point on the magnificent leather sofa, Gus's giant head still resting peacefully on my lap, I watched her face press against the cold glass. Her eyes, wide with shock, scanned the transformed scene within. The vibrant football field rug, the glowing, retro pinball machine, and most damning of all, the colossal, snoring Saint Bernard occupying what she clearly considered her spot on her formerly sterile white couch. A sound, somewhere between a primal scream and a choked sob, tore from her throat. She instantly whipped out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. A novel's worth of angry, all-caps messages lighting up my own device. That was the precise moment I decided to deliver the coup de grace. I sent her a single, simple text message, a carefully crafted epitaph to our relationship. You said to stop acting like we're married. You said I don't get a say. I agree. This is my house, and you don't get a say in how I live in it. Since we're not married, I've returned your non-marital property to a secure location. The address is 123 Storage Way, Unit 42. The code is 1234. You have 1 month. Have a great life. I then blocked her number, severing the last digital tether. The doorbell camera, ever vigilant, recorded her reading the text. Her eyes darted from her phone to the window, then back to her phone, the words undoubtedly searing themselves into her consciousness. Then, with a scream of pure, unadulterated rage, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the suburban night, she hurled her phone onto my immaculately manicured lawn. It was a truly spectacular meltdown, a chaotic ballet of fury and despair. She ranted and raved, a furious, incoherent torrent of accusations, for another 10 minutes, her voice growing hoarse, before Tiffany, the lead harpy, mercifully arrived to retrieve her from the scene of her ignominious defeat. The next day, as predictably as a bad sequel, the social media campaign began. Vague, self-pitying posts about being betrayed, about men who can't handle a strong, independent woman, flooded our mutual feeds. It was, in a word, pathetic. But I knew I had one more, far more potent, card to play. Final update. The ensuing social media drama was as predictable as it was incredibly boring. Jessica and the Harpies, a collective wail of self-pity, flooded their stories with sad, melancholic music, accompanied by platitudes about knowing your worth and cutting out toxic energy. It was all so agonizingly generic, so utterly devoid of originality, that it veered into the territory of accidental comedy. They were attempting to paint me as the villain, but they were using a paint-by-numbers kit designed for toddlers. I allowed their histrionics to play out for about 2 days, observing their pathetic attempts to manipulate the narrative. Then, I decided it was time to provide some much-needed context. I chose not to engage with them directly, avoiding the inevitable mud-slinging contest. Instead, I crafted a meticulously curated post on my own private social media page, accessible only to our mutual friends, the precise audience whose opinions truly mattered. It was a photo album, a before and after masterpiece of visual storytelling. The first picture captured my living room from just a month prior. The oppressively sad beige couch, the collection of pointless bowls that served no discernible function, the pervasive aura of a perpetually uninviting dentist's waiting room. The caption was concise, impactful. Before, the second picture presented my living room as it now stood. The glorious black leather recliner sofa, a monument to comfort. The vibrant football field rug, a statement of unapologetic masculinity. The glowing, vintage pinball machine. And, sprawling majestically across the new sofa, Gus the Saint Bernard, a furry embodiment of loyalty and joy. This caption simply read, "After." The final image was a selfie, a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness. Gus and I, side by side on the sofa, both beaming. The caption, a final, elegant thrust, was devastating in its simplicity. Decided to redecorate based on my new relationship status. It was brought to my attention that I'm not married and don't get a say in things. So I'm embracing my freedom. Bachelor pad. Dodges my copilot. No say no stay. The post was a nuclear bomb. The sheer, unadulterated pettiness of it, combined with the undeniable, overwhelming cuteness of Gus, was an irrefutable, winning combination. My friends found it unequivocally hilarious. A masterclass in understated vengeance. The story, now armed with its proper, undeniable context, spread like wildfire through our shared social circles. People who had initially extended their sympathy to Jessica, swayed by her self-serving narratives, were now presented with the full, unvarnished picture. The prevailing narrative was no longer psycho boyfriend kicks girlfriend out. It had decisively shifted to girlfriend tells boyfriend their relationship is a joke, is shocked when he believes her. Jessica's harpies, her once cackling Greek chorus, fell eerily silent. It was, after all, exceedingly difficult to maintain a convincing victim narrative when the so-called villain was posting adorable, heartwarming pictures with his giant, loyal dog. The aftermath for Jessica was predictably rough. She initially crashed with Tiffany, but even that precarious arrangement, I later heard, lasted less than a week. Tiffany, it seemed, grew quickly weary of Jessica's incessant complaining and her complete disinclination to contribute to the rent. Jessica ultimately found herself relegated to moving back in with her parents in a quiet, anonymous town 3 hours away, a stark, undeniable symbol of her complete regression. She did, of course, attempt to retaliate through legal channels, a desperate, final grasp at control. I received a self-important letter from a lawyer demanding immediate access to the house to retrieve her wrongfully held property and seeking substantial financial compensation for being, as they dramatically put it, made homeless. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense professional, responded with a concise package. A copy of my mortgage statement, irrefutable proof of ownership, a copy of the lease agreement bearing only my name, and a polite, yet pointed, inquiry as to whether Jessica would be willing to reimburse me for the 6 months of rent, utilities, and food she had so freely consumed while residing in my home as a non-married person with no obligations. We never heard another word from her lawyer. The silence was, in itself, a form of sweet victory. The funniest, and perhaps most profoundly satisfying, part of this entire ordeal unfolded about a month ago. I was at the dog park with Gus, who was happily engaged in his tireless pursuit of a slobbery tennis ball. I was idly chatting with another dog owner when a woman approached me hesitantly. It was Chardonnay, the third harpy, looking incredibly awkward, almost physically pained by her presence. "Hey Tom," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look, I wanted to say I'm sorry about that night at your house. We were really out of line." I simply shrugged, maintaining my composure. Jessica said what she said. I just took her at her word. Chardonnay shook her head, a deep, weary sigh escaping her lips. "Yeah, I know," she mumbled. "She's a lot. She called me last week, complaining that her parents are making her get a job. She said it was all your fault for ruining her life." She paused, her gaze drifting to Gus, who was now attempting the impossible feat of fitting 3 tennis balls into his enormous mouth simultaneously. "Honestly, it looks like you're doing just fine." And she was right. I was doing just fine. The house was no longer a sad beige prison. It was definitively my home, a sanctuary of my own making. The vintage pinball machine still refused to function as a game, but it served as an excellent, conversation-starting centerpiece, a beacon of quirky individuality. And Gus, my loyal, drooling companion, was undeniably the best roommate I had ever had. He was fiercely loyal, unfailingly funny, and never, not once, complained about my cooking, no matter how experimental. I had learned a valuable, almost profoundly simple, lesson from this entire experience. Sometimes, the most potent revenge isn't a grand, complicated scheme filled with elaborate traps and intricate deceptions. Sometimes, it's just listening to what people say and, quite simply, believing them. Jessica had told me exactly who she was and what our relationship, in her eyes, truly meant. I merely decided to agree with her. She had declared with such certainty, I didn't get a say. And now in her life, I truly didn't have one. More importantly, in my life, she didn't either. And that, combined with a giant, endlessly drooling dog who cherished my company, was a pretty happy ending indeed.